Okay, hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the BAN-KAST channel. I am your host, as always, Teching101. Remembering that this is, in fact, a podcast channel, tonight's video will be audio only, which is great because I don't have to worry about how horrible my hair looks right now. Just to visualize, I am sitting in my studio at around 9 o'clock at night right now, drinking a nice cup of coffee. Oh, that's some good coffee ASMR there. Okay, well, this is something certainly a little different. I am going to be calling this a video essay. I don't know if this is actually what a video essay is, but I'm calling it that because it sounds professional. And I must say, it was rather nostalgic just to bust out Microsoft PowerPoint for this. This is a program I had to use all the time when I was in public school, all the way up from, community college to university, to, a lot of classes required it. You had to make a presentation and everybody used PowerPoint. Probably the last time I had to use it was in, I want to say, fall of 2016. That was the last time I had like normal college classes before I graduated. And yeah, here we are again. I'm using the updated version, the recent edition of PowerPoint. And I must say they streamlined a lot of things from the last time I used it, so that's pretty cool. So, as you can see from the title here, we are going to be looking at the similarities between the Bount arc in Bleach and the Chapter Black Saga in Yu Yu Hakusho. If you are familiar with both of these arcs, this will be rather interesting. If you aren't familiar with either of these arcs, probably not the video for you. But suffice to say, I have always been rather kind to the Bount arc compared to a lot of other people's opinions of it. I understand it's a long filler arc and people just want to get to the plot of the story, and I remember especially growing up I hated this arc because I just wanted to get to the stuff involving the Arankars and Grimmjow and Ukiura and Aizen, and having to slog week by week from, I think it was around like 2008, 2009 when this arc was going on, and just this inconsequential story about a group of villains that will never do anything else in the story. It was rather rough. But ever since then, I went back and rewatched it, not super regularly, but I did do a 6-part miniseries, kind of like documentary on the Bount arc way back in the day, probably around 2013 on the main channel. Had to take all those videos down, unfortunately, because I used a lot of anime footage, and YouTube didn't agree with that too much. Actually, a couple years ago, I tried to re-edit all of those episodes of the Bount arc review into a single video and tried to upload that, and yeah, that got, copyright blocked like almost immediately. So unfortunately, probably never going to be able to show you that again unless I go through and painstakingly edit out all of that. But this is kind of the remake of that, sort of, in a way. Not exactly. That was a more in-depth analysis of the arc, but here we are kind of comparing it to the Chapter Black Saga. And the reason why I'm doing this, in case you're looking at this and wondering, what does this have to do with, why are these two things here? These two things don't, connect. Oh, they do. They do in ways that you have probably never realized if you never actually sat down and thought about it, because most people probably don't sit around and think about the Bount arc very much in Bleach. There is pretty much a plot beat by plot beat, one-to-one comparison between these two arcs, to the point where it is uncanny. Bleach was on Netflix last year. I think they took it off last February, and I think they only had episodes all the way up to the end of the Bount arc, so I rewatched a lot of stuff there, and it finally hit me, and it also probably lends to why I had kind of a soft spot for the arc, why I didn't hate it as much as a lot of the other Bleach fillers. The Bount arc is my favorite filler in Bleach. I like it even more than the Ray Guy arc, which that's probably by many considered the best of the fillers, but I think the Bount arc, go back and rewatch it. Go back and rewatch it without any of the misgivings about, like, oh my god, I just want to get to the Arankars already. None of this stuff matters. If you go back and just rewatch it, it's actually pretty good. There's actually some cool soundtracks that are debuted in that arc, like the Citadel of the Bount, which are reused throughout most of the Bleach story, that are really good. The characters are not really all that bad. I mean, some of them are shallow. That's the staple for a lot of filler characters. But we're going to be getting into this today because the person, I don't know who wrote the Bount arc, probably a team of writers that wrote the Bount arc. They had to have been fans of Yu Yu Hakusho, and I know Bleach is often regarded as, and I'm just going to get into the first slide here, actually, just to kind of give you some setup here. So Yu Yu Hakusho came out in 1993. Bount arc came out as anime-only filler arc in 2006. A lot of people like to compare Bleach as like a successor to Yu Yu Hakusho. Yu Yu Hakusho sort of started the idea of shonen manga with a teenage protagonist who kind of gets recruited by this otherworldly society to fight on their side. Yusuke becomes a spirit detective. Ichigo becomes a Shinigami, a deputy Shinigami, substitute Soul Reaper, whatever you want to call it, depending on the translation. And this even continues with Jujutsu Kaisen now, I guess, or maybe Demon Slayer as well, though I'm not as familiar with either of those series, so I don't really want to go more on about that. But a lot of people compare Bleach and Yu Yu Hakusho, right? It comes up a lot. So this is definitely a prime example of that, where I'm pretty sure whoever was tasked with the job of writing the Bount arc was a fan of Yu Yu Hakusho and took the Chapter Black Saga as a springboard and basis for what the Bount arc would become. And you know what? You could easily say that that's just ripping off Yu Yu Hakusho. Listen, if they were going to base a filler arc in Bleach off of any arc in manga history, the Chapter Black Saga is not a bad choice. It is like a really solid, it is my favorite arc in all of Yu Yu Hakusho. So you're taking a really good arc, like one of the greatest arcs in shonen manga history, and you're adapting that into a filler. I'm not really going to have a lot of complaints with that. Is it going to be as good as the original? Well, of course not, but at least you're basing it off of something that's good, right? And for that reason, like I said, Bount arc, not really all that bad. So let's dive into this, and you'll see what I mean. All right, so starting right off with the parallels, the main cast returns home from a previous arc where they had to travel to an otherworldly place and fight a battle with supernatural beings. So this is the setup for both of these arcs. We'll have Yu Yu Hakusho on the left and Bleach on the right for this comparison in this series here. I just realized this. I called this a podcast because the podcast channel. You need to watch this. This is a visual video. Whatever. Okay. Anyway, continuing on. So in Yu Yu Hakusho, you have the Dark Tournament arc, which that's an arc by many that's also considered like the greatest arc in Yu Yu Hakusho. I think a lot of people consider it that as well. Where Yusuke have this big final battle with Toguro, epic battle here, and then you had in Bleach Ichigo, Orihime Chad, and Uryu heading to the Soul Society to rescue Rukia. So there's different reasons why they go to fight. In Bleach's case, it's a rescue operation, and in this case, well, Toguro kind of threatens Yusuke, like, unless he joins the tournament and fights and wins. Toguro, like, threatens to kill Keiko. Is it Keiko? I think it's Keiko. Who's Ichigo's, not Ichigo's, Yusuke's girlfriend. I'm gonna make a lot of, I'm gonna flub this a lot between Ichigo and Yusuke, because they're kind of similar characters, so that's gonna happen quite a bit. So it's an arc where they have to go to some other place. In the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, it's an island where the tournament's being held, and it's, I think, actually still on, you know, Earth in Yu Yu Hakusho. It's just an island that there's like a lot of demons and stuff and spirit world denizens that are allowed to go to. And in the case with Bleach, it's actually a parallel dimensions, another world they have to travel to. But that's kind of the setup here. So after this arc, the status quo resets in their individual series as the cast returns to their normal life at home. Along with this, one of the main characters has recently lost their powers from the previous outing. So in the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, you have Kuwabara, who has the spirit sword ability. He just doesn't have those powers when he gets back. He just, for whatever reason, after the Dark Tournament concludes, he just cannot use his powers anymore. And Uryu Ishida loses his Quincy powers during the Soul Society arc. So I could see a parallel right there where somebody was writing the Bount arc and they're like, wait a second, Uryu lost his powers. We can work that into the Bount arc, which is really interesting because a lot of times with fillers, you'll have the authors, the writers of the filler arcs going out of their way to not address things that were brought up in the canon because that's the main author. That's like in the case with Bleach, you can't have Uryu's powers come back permanently in the filler arc. That's something that Kubo needs to do, right? But they can still, there's still some leeway here. You can still write that into the plot thread of the filler arc. You just have to make sure that by the end of it, it kind of still has Uryu not have his powers. So while we go through the Bount arc, Uryu will actually regain his powers, or rather he'll get a temporary set of Quincy powers that he uses and are then destroyed by the end of that arc, resetting him to having no abilities again. In the case with Kuwabara, it's less explained why he can't use his powers. Later on, it's given that like they were laying dormant or like in a transformation stage, like a chrysalis stage, so that's why you couldn't use them for a while. But the comparisons are definitely there. Yusuke and Kuwabara, they go back to school. Same thing with Ichigo, Uryu, and Orihime. They go back to Karakura High. And there's even a scene at the beginning of the Bount arc where Ichigo's just kind of chilling out under a tree, and he's just like, well, guess everything's back to normal, I guess. Now, there are some differences here, whereas Yusuke seems rather bored with returning home. He's just like, I just fought this epic war against these, against Toguro and his minions in this giant tournament. I've unlocked all this great power. I have spirit orb technique given to me by Genkai. I have all this crazy power. Yusuke feels kind of like, just like, I'm so much stronger than everyone around me. I'm looking for a challenge. Whereas Ichigo is just genuinely happy to be home. You know, the Soul Society was not something that he's like, I'm going to get really strong. Yeah, Ichigo did get really strong. He got his Bankai and all that, but it's not like, wow, I'm really bored. I wish I could use Bankai and just cut somebody up, but I can't do that anymore. So, I guess I'm just going to go and start random fights. No, Ichigo's just like, all right, I'm glad we went to the Soul Society. We saved Rukia. Everything's good. I don't have to worry about this anymore. Yeah, there's that Aizen thing, but okay. So this arc really kicks off with a little mini arc at the beginning, and this is really where the parallels start to scream, okay? 3 mysterious new characters arrive and are first established as villains. They kidnap members of the main cast and mess with them, but do not directly harm them. So in Yu Yu Hakusho, we have the 3 new psychics. We have Asato Kido, Mitsunari Yanagisawa, and Yu Kaito. These are psychics that gain the abilities of territory, and they're from Mushiori City, and they use these abilities to kind of like confront Yusuke at the beginning of the arc and mess with him. Then we have the 3 new mod souls that are revealed at the very beginning of the Bount arc that are kind of the main antagonists for the first like 6 or 7 episodes. We have Ririn, Kuroda, and Noba. All right, and these 3 individuals all have different abilities. The new characters have strange and unique abilities that the main cast has difficulty overcoming, one of which being the exact same power. Admittedly, it's a little different in the way of like the range of the power, but the basis of the ability is exactly the same. So with the psychics, you have Kido's ability, which is shadow manipulation. Anybody that steps on his shadow is rendered immobile, kind of like shadow possession jutsu from Naruto a little bit, except he can't really control the person, just lock them in place. He uses that ability to capture Yusuke at the very beginning of the arc. Then we have Yanagisawa's ability, which is copy appearance, which is he has the ability to copy anybody he touches, not only copy their physical appearance, but also their memories and spiritual energy signature. Then we have Yu Kaito's ability, which is probably my favorite. It's the taboo ability. The little encounter that Kaito has with Kurama in the house is probably like one of my favorite episodes in all of Yu Yu Hakusho. I really love how his ability works. You can also see with Tagashi, who is the mangaka of Yu Yu Hakusho, if you didn't already know. This is kind of a setup for Nen abilities later on, where Tagashi does have a lot of characters that just have straight-up kind of combat abilities. He has a good, healthy combination, where there are, like, big, tough dudes in his manga that just punch things really hard and make things explode with sheer raw abilities, powers, aura, or whatever. But then you also have characters like Kaido that fights much more methodically and has an ability that's much more based on intelligence and word games, and it's not a direct kind of ability that you can just punch through. Then we have the mod souls. Ririn's ability is to create illusions around her, and Kuroda's ability is copy appearance, much like Mitsunari's. However, it is different, where he can only copy physical appearance. He cannot copy strength or memories or anything like that, so they kind of, nerfed him a little bit there. And then we have Noba's, who is teleportation. So 3 unique, very distinct abilities. I mean, we've seen psychic abilities in Yu Yu Hakusho up until this point, so that's not that unusual. Though the way these abilities are used in the territory are different from how the psychic powers were used up until now in the story. And these Mod Souls abilities, they have nothing to do with Zanpakuto or any like Hollow powers, Shinigami powers, or anything like that. They're abilities that are catered specifically to them. So there's that. The new characters make the main cast travel to a location and compete in various trials and games in order to get their friends back. So in the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, Yusuke is actually captured by these psychics. Later, Hiei is also captured, as well as Botan. Their souls are, anyway. And then in Bleach, you have Orihime and Chad that are captured pretty early on, and it's up to Renji and Uryu and Ichigo, as well as Kon, to go and save them. So I love the House of Four Dimensions in Yu Yu Hakusho. This little mini arc at the beginning of the chapter Black Saga, I love that. I love the design of that house and this creepy little house in town they have to go visit, and there's all these weird rooms. I wish that little mini arc actually extended a little bit longer. They explored the house maybe a little bit more. I think you could have gotten some more mileage out of that than what happened. But then again, at the end of the day, this is just setup. This is just set up to get to the main plot. We're not even to the main villain group yet. And in Bleach, it's not the exact same thing. There's not like one central location they go to. The mod souls kind of mess with the group. They kind of send them to a museum where they have to kind of find their way out of this labyrinth, this ever-repeating labyrinth. So Uryu has to kind of use his puzzle-solving skills in order to get them out of there. And then after that, after the museum, they immediately go to Karakura High, where it turns out one of them is actually a fake that's being cloned, and they have to figure out the copy in order to solve the test. So just a lot of tests and things. And there's a bunch of other little ones. Like, I remember Ririne was, playing a game of phone tag with Ichigo, kind of just like, you have 5 minutes to go and answer the phone at this location at the intersection of 1st and 2nd Street or whatever. And so it's not to the same level of like, messing with them in terms of like challenges and trials. They're more like children's games that Ririne is kind of forcing Ichigo and Renji and Uryu to kind of play in Bleach. Whereas in Yu Yu Hakusho, they're definitely more methodical, more planned out, especially with Yu Kaito's taboo ability. The trials focus on the main cast getting along and using teamwork, judgment, quick thinking, and strengthening their bonds with each other. The trials end with the reveal that the 3 mysterious characters are actually allies all along, following the orders of an older and more experienced mentor figure. So these trials were not really meant to kill the main cast. They were rather there to, help them out, critical thinking skills and whatnot. Genkai is revealed to be the mastermind behind the psychics, and Kisuke Uehara is revealed to be the mastermind behind the mod souls, and actually the creator of the mod souls there. And these characters both explain the reason why they sent the main cast through all of this. Obviously, Ichigo and Yusuke have, compunctions with this. She's like, what the hell? What are you doing, you old bag? Why'd you have to send these psychics after us? Come on. And Ichigo has a similar reaction to Uehara. A little bit on this, and I actually love this lesson, and you don't see this that much in shonen manga, and whenever it is touched upon, it seems to be forgotten almost immediately. Admittedly, this sticks a lot better with Yu Yu Hakusho because the arc is canon rather in Bleach, where the arc is largely, filler, so I say largely filler because the Bount arc is referenced a few times in the Arrancar arc. Like, they actually, one of those filler arcs where they actually try to incorporate it into the canon of the manga a little bit, but it just kind of fizzles out after a while. So I love this lesson, though. The main cast learns the importance of thinking outside the box in a fight. Never let your guard down. Not all fights can be won with physical force alone. This serves as an important deviation from typical shonen formula, where, usually we'll have stuff where characters get stronger and stronger and stronger physically, increase their spirit energy or whatever, and be like, I'm a lot stronger than I was now. Before, I could punch out a mountain. Now I could punch out the entire moon or something like that, And the characters do get stronger. Like, Ichigo has Bankai. He's a lot stronger and everything like that. But I love the lesson being taught here that's like, listen, it doesn't matter if you have enough spiritual energy to destroy the planet. If somebody catches you with an ability that's like tailor-made for trapping an opponent, like for example the shadow ability, you can't do shit about it. You're trapped. You're done. You can't punch your way out of every single fight. You can't Getsuga Tensho or Bankai your way through every single battle. Sometimes you need to step back and think and figure out a way to get past their enemy, because they're not going to be just fighting brute strength. They're going to be fighting smart. Now, like I said, this ties a lot more into Yu Yu Hakusho's plotline because this is a canon lesson, and I think Tagashi... Now, keep in mind, Tagashi was writing this shit in the 90s, when you had a lot of manga that followed that very generic formula of character trains, physically goes through a training arc, does a lot of push-ups, drinks a lot of juice, unlocks a new ability, uses that new ability to defeat the main enemy. Then the next arc, they go through another training arc, get even stronger. They use that new ability to fight this new opponent, and they win that way. And that's all it really is. Not to say you can't do a story like that with interesting characters. It's just that it's important to look at like other ways battles can be won. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the idea that even though Yusuke is insanely powerful after the events of the Dark Tournament, these abilities by these psychics can still take him out. Because Yusuke is very brash. He's very hot-headed. He'll run right into a fight without thinking first. And Genkai was like, okay, we need to fix that because you're going to be fighting some really strong opponents where you might be able to physically defeat no problem, but they're not going to give you that opportunity. You know what I mean? Ichigo in a similar vein, although Ichigo, while he is a bruiser, he does tend to jump into fights. He's a lot more logical, I think. I think he can calm down and think when he actually has to. So Uehara, and this makes a lot of sense given where we're coming off of Soul Society, because Ichigo has his Bankai, of course, but the Bount arc actually implements a whole thing where Ichigo cannot use his Bankai, or rather he has to relearn it, which honestly, I don't really have a problem with that, because Ichigo only uses his Bankai, I think, twice in the Soul Society. He uses it against Byakuya, then he goes out of his Bankai, and then back into it again when he tries to fight Aizen. So the idea that this is a brand new ability that Ichigo, the sole reason Ichigo unlocked the Bankai was in order to save Rukia. So the idea is, after Ichigo saves Rukia, this is a brand new ability he just accessed. He still doesn't have complete control over it, or he's still kind of shaky in going into the form. He hasn't mastered it yet. And that makes sense, given the fact that even though you can release your Bankai, like Renji, as Byakuya said to Renji, like even doing your Bankai does not mean you've mastered your Bankai. It takes another 10 years of training to get to that point, right? So Ichigo was able to release his Bankai in 3 days with the Tenshin time method, but he still has a lot to learn. So I really don't have a problem with Ichigo not just being able to go into like Bankai, Bankai, Bankai whenever he feels like it. It's still going to take a little bit of training to really get that down. Later on during the Bount arc, Ichigo has a moment where he speaks to Zangetsu again, and they have this really interesting conversation where Zangetsu's like, do you want to fight, or do you just want to win, or something like that. And they have a whole discussion there about what Bankai really is. And it's not exact to what the manga really eventually will do with it, but it's close enough. It's an interesting scene there, and then Ichigo finally does get his Bankai back. Of course, this is just a means to nerf Ichigo in the early arc, so Ichigo can't just solve all of his problems with Bankai anyway. There's even a scene early on where Ichigo is like, well, what about my Getsuga Tensho? Can't I use that? And Uehara says, well, yeah, in theory, but can you really control that power yet, Ichigo? And it makes sense. Ichigo just learned how to use Getsuga Tensho from Zangetsu. Like, he learned the name of that technique like a week ago. You're not going to instantly know how to release it at will. It's going to take some training. You know what I mean? So I like this. I like this. Parallels, back to that. A large threat to the world is revealed immediately after this ruse. So this is where we get into the real meat of these arcs. In the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, we have Shinobu Sensui and the Psychics, the 7 Psychics. We have Doctor, Gatekeeper, Seaman. Yes, Sensui himself. We have Sniper, Game Master, and Gluttony. What was it? No, Gourmet. That was his name, Gourmet. And then in the case with Jinkaria, we have the Bounce. There's quite a few Bounce. I don't remember all their names. Ugaki is on the left there, the one with the glasses. Then Go Koga, then Jinkaria. I think I actually remember their names. And Yoshi. There's another member named Yoshino, which to this day I don't know why they had 2 characters named so similar in the filler arc. You could have just named her something else, Yoshi and Yoshino, but whatever. And Sawatori is off to the side. There's some other Bounce like Ho and Bon. There's also who was the dude that had Ritse, like the ninja kind of guy with the hair? I forget his name, but anyway, yeah. Mabaki or Mabashi, maybe I think his name was, and something like that. So these are the main threats of the arc, as revealed. A group here. The larger threat may lead to a dimensional distortion of some kind. This would lead then to a further result, the end of the world by beings from this other dimension. So in the chapter Black Saga, the overarching threat that Yusuke has to defeat, like the reason they have to defeat Sensui, is Sensui is attempting to open up a tunnel to the demon world, and we learn how devastatingly scary that is, how that could bring about the apocalypse, how Koenma goes on this long monologue about how dangerous the depths of demon world are, and how you have the S-class demons, and just one S-class demon arriving in the human world could literally bring about this war and like this, like the destruction of everything, like life and all humans would just die. The world would be obliterated by the power of a single S-class demon. Now in Bleach, even if you kind of remember the Bount arc, this may come up as sort of like I don't remember this because I didn't really either. This is a plot thread that is scrapped pretty early on. It's revealed that it wasn't really the main focus of the Bounts, but it was thought to be their original goal. Was Kisuke originally assumed, he posited that the Bounts are attempting to open a rift by eating human souls, that this would cause a rift in the dimensions and open a hole to Hueco Mundo, where the Hollows dwells. So he was afraid of the Bounts opening up a gateway to Hueco Mundo, and then the Hollows would come through, and then they would like wipe out all life on the earth. Like Hollows would just run rampant through the world of the living. Now, this is a plot thread, like I said, that's abandoned, but the similarities are pretty obvious there. And you can also see, maybe when they were initially writing, I could see them writing this as a plot thread, as the main threat, but maybe they were stopped. Maybe as like the first draft of the Bount arc was sent in to be approved, they were like, oh, maybe the you know, the demons or the Hollows from Hueco Mundo are going to come into the world of the living and attack them. And then maybe Kubo had to look at it, or somebody had to look at it, like one of the editors, and was just like, no, because we're doing stuff with Hueco Mundo in the Arrancar arc. We're eventually going to deal with the Arrancars themselves, you know, Ukiora, the Espada, the Fracciones, and everything like that, the Numeros. Aizen himself, you know, heading up Las Noches in Hueco Mundo, and this is all explored later in the Arrancar saga. So there was limits to what they could really do with Hueco Mundo in the Bount arc, just because, well, we saw Hueco Mundo a little bit in early Bleach, but we hadn't really explored it as a dimension. So it's actually interesting to think that maybe the original draft of the Bount arc was like, oh, we're gonna get a Espada coming in, like a really high class Vasto Lorde Hollow entering the world of the living and attacking them. Very similar to the S-class demons in Yu Yu Hakusho. And maybe that was the idea, but they were like, no, we really don't want to do that. I mean, that'd be cool to introduce the concept of Vasto Lordes and Anchujas and like different classes of Menos Grande while during the Bount arc. I think the best filler arcs actually incorporate stuff from the canon of the manga in there that we haven't noticed yet, just to kind of give you a little hint. There's actually a few of those in the Bount arc they snuck in. My favorite is in episode 80 of Bleach, which is also a filler. It's like a filler in a filler. It's one of those. But it's an episode where the three Mod Souls are attempting to like booby trap Ichigo's house in case the Bounts show up. And they set up a bunch of these traps to sort of like anybody that has spiritual energy, the traps will trigger. And they're a bunch of lame traps, like a bucket like landing on somebody's head, or like sticky fly paper, stuff like that. Well, anyway, Ishin comes home one day and he actually opens the door and he activates one of these spiritual pressure traps, which the Mod Soul said you have to have a certain amount of spiritual energy in order to activate these traps, and Ishin did. So that's kind of foreshadowing that Ishin is a Shinigami, which was not revealed yet in the anime. So that's some interesting scenes there. But yeah, the idea of the Bounts opening a rift to Hueco Mundo, that's something that gets scrapped relatively early on. The villain group all have powers that vary wildly from one another. All right, so in the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, you have the Psychics territories. They all have very unique kind of abilities. Like I said, once again, very reminiscent to Nen in Hunter x Hunter. And then in Bleach, you have the Dolls, which are beings that are created through a form of, like, alchemy. Which is fascinating. There's a whole episode where they go into the backstory of the Bounts, like Go Koga during like the 1800s or the 1700s, and it's nuts. We actually see how these dolls are created. They're sentient, autonomous life forms that are bound to the user's soul, but they have their own personalities, and they can actually turn on their owners and kill them if they're too weak. So it's a really, once again, they did something different. They didn't want to do the exact same thing like Zanpakuto, like magic swords or whatever, so they decided to create these things called dolls. And the dolls' personality are really cool. Dulk, which is the doll we see here, which is Go Koga's, she has this really kind of like dominatrix kind of personality, dommy mommy kind of personality, and whatever, that's cool. All right, that I can get behind that. That's cool. Whatever. It adds some extra flair to it. It's pretty neat. The group contains a former member of an organization allied with the main cast. These characters defected and are branded as traitors. So in the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, you have Sensui, who was a former Spirit World detective before Ichigo. By the way, the plot of there being another substitute Shinigami before Ichigo would actually be addressed much later during the Fullbringer arc, which also takes parallels to Yu Yu Hakusho there, although in that case that's canon, so that's Kubo directly taking stuff, taking some cues from Tagashi there. But yeah, Sensui was the second spirit detective right before Yusuke was. And then in the case with Bleach, we have not a former substitute Shinigami, but we have a Shinigami, former member of Squad 11 of the Gotei 13, Maki Ichinose, that actually defected after Kenpachi murdered the former Kenpachi. Zaraki killed Kijano, I think his name was. Yeah, the former Kenpachi, Zaraki, the one that was during Turn Back the Pendulum. We didn't get to actually see during Turn Back the Pendulum. But Kenpachi killed him in battle. And now this is the thing that's kind of funny, because we don't know who the former Kenpachi was yet. We know he existed from some words spoken by Kenpachi and Tozen during the Soul Society arc, where Tozen was like, you know, ever since you killed the former captain of Squad 11, I've never trusted you, Kenpachi Zaraki. You're a threat to all that we've had. So they take the idea that Kijano was actually this super honorable man, and Maki was like really like, oh man, this is a dude I would love to follow into battle. And then Kenpachi kills him. And the idea is Kenpachi is this like bloodthirsty brute that killed this honorable warrior. And I don't think the former Kenpachi was super honorable. I think he was just a Kenpachi, just like every other Kenpachi. He was just this lazy. Actually, he was really lazy. He would sleep a lot, and he would just murder people. So I don't think he was super honorable. But Maki decides to challenge Kenpachi Zaraki to a fight to kind of avenge his former captain. Maki, of course, loses, and he just says, screw this, and he just leaves the Soul Society, and he's like wandering a desert one day, and he encounters Karia. So that's his backstory. It's an interesting idea. He also has one of the very few light-based Zanpakutos in Bleach. This is one that's right on the nose. I love this. A fight takes place at a hospital. It's pretty on the nose on this one. There's an entire, once again, a little fight, little mini arc where Yusuke has to fight against one of the psychics called the Doctor, and this takes place at a hospital. And then there's an entire 2-episode arc in the Bount arc where they have to go through the escape, the shutdown hospital, where these two Bounts, these twins, Ho and Ban, use water-based dolls to like lock them in the hospital. And even when they get out, it's like raining outside, so it's like, no, you know. And so yeah, this one is just not really much to say about this one other than just fights take place at a hospital. The villains want one of the main cast to help them open a hole to another dimension. To do this, the villains must figure out a way to reawaken that character's lost powers. So in the case with the tunnel to Demon World, there's the Kakai barrier that's blocking the powerful S-Class and A-Class demons from getting through. So Gatekeeper says to Sensui, like, it's too strong, Mr. Sensui. I'm going to need someone that can cut through a dimensional barrier. Do you know anybody? And then Sensui realizes that Kuwabara is the one that has this power and sends Seaman out to fight him and hopefully awaken it, so then they can eventually capture Kuwabara and get him to cut open the Kakai barrier with his dimensional sword that he will awaken. In the case with Uryu, in order to get into they're not trying to get into Huecomundo, they're actually trying to open a Senkaimon into the Soul Society. In order to do that, they're going to require Uryu's Quincy powers to kind of create, because they're physical, like living matter, they can't enter a spiritual realm as is the Soul Society. So just like how at the beginning of the Soul Society arc, Uehara had to make a Senkaimon, but he also had to install these tags on the Senkaimon that would convert Chad and Orihime and Uryu's like physical matter into spiritual matter, into reishi, so they can actually go to the Soul Society and do stuff. So once again, it's taking that little thing in Bleach, it's just like this one time they had to do this, and like making it into a plot thread in Bleach, into the Bount arc. So that's cool. And then this is the catalyst for Uryu getting his Quincy powers back with this little bracelet bangle thing that gives him, it was basically like training wheels for Quincy's that had weak powers. And, you know, they invented that ability, but I think it works really well. One of the main villains changes sides and helps out the main cast. In the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, this is Seaman. Space in between Seaman. In fact, I don't think there's a space in his name, actually, but I'm putting one in there. And his name is Kiyoshi Mitari. And he decides to, after the fight with Kuwabara, he kind of goes home with him, and he learns he's not a bad guy, and he decides to help out the group. And then in... Oh, Uryu's Quincy power. Oh, I forgot to change that. Sorry, I made that one mistake. All right, so Yoshino Soma here represents Uryu's Quincy powers. But no, Yoshino Soma is the member of the Bounce that is very, she doesn't like what Kari is attempting. She's trying to escape, trying to do her own thing, and attempts to help out Uryu as much as she can. She kind of serves to explain the Bounce strife and who they really are to Uryu early on in the arc. This is something I just realized and actually added it in. This wasn't in my notes originally, but supernatural insect-like beings are used by the villain group. In this case, you have the demon world insects that... So there's two different types of insects. There's the insects that get into the world of the living, into the living world just because of the dimensional rift of the tunnel to demon world. They just kind of get in there. But then there are these insects that are specifically used by the Doctor to inject various viruses into the humans, and so they're all dropped sick and they can't be cured until he's defeated. So that also adds like a ticking clock for Yusuke to defeat him. In the case with Bleach, we have the Bito, which are dolls that were created via Yoshino's soul. This very tearful event where Yoshino sacrifices herself. She tries to defeat Karia by fusing with her doll. And Bounts in general are unable to have children. And Yoshino is one of the few exceptions to that. So Karia manipulates her into giving up her life to create the Bito. And so the Bito are these little mosquito-like dolls that go around and suck the life energy out of the humans of Karakura Town. And then the Bounce can like extract this vial of like condensed spiritual energy, drink it, and gain, you know, stronger abilities and like upgrade their dolls using that concentrated spirit energy. The personality of the main villain is calm and self-assured on the surface, but is far more emotional underneath. They also view their allies as expendable and use manipulation tactics borderline on cult-like in order to gain followers. So this is the way Sensui kind of gains traction. A lot of the people that work for Sensui are kind of manipulated by him into thinking that he is kind of like their savior, their kind of like messiah figure. A lot of the people that he kind of, you know, preys on are people that are dejected from society, are outcasts, and he's like, come with me and I will give you a place in this new world. You know, I will wipe out all of humanity. You hate humanity, I hate humanity. We'll annihilate them all, and we'll be the only ones left, and we'll be the ones to make a new world, a better world that's more catering to us. And the people he goes after, like, you know, Game Master, Amanuma, and Matari, they're like school students, you know what I mean? They're just being bullied, and they're at a point in their lives where they're dealing with a lot of stuff already. And Sensui just kind of takes advantage of that and is just like, hey, do you hate humanity? He's like, yeah, I hate humanity because I was bullied in school. And he's like, okay, good. Then use that hatred and work for me, and then we'll end all of humanity, right? So that's the kind of guy that Sensui is. Gene, because the Bounts they're very old. They've been around for a long, long time. He kind of uses his clout as the leader of the Bounts to kind of like usher them into a new age where the Bounts have been ostracized and, you know, exterminated throughout history by the Shinigami, and he kind of uses that as the driving force. He's like, hey, it is time for us to come out of the shadows. It is time for us to gather together and fight back against the Shinigami, and we can eliminate them, and we can be the ones that rule over the Soul Society and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of what they do. And they use very, like I said, like cult-like sort of oratory to kind of gather up followers and manipulate them and kind of bend them to their will. Neither of them really care about the people that follow them. And we're going to see that here. So this is a little bit on villain motivation here. The motive of the main villain is revealed to be a form of self-loathing and desire to destroy a specific group. This would also result in the destruction of an entire realm or world. So in the case with Karia, he harbors an intense hatred from the Soul Society because the Soul Society created the Bounce, but also kind of tried to... They didn't like the fact they created the Bounce. It was kind of an accident, and so they immediately tried to exterminate them throughout history. So a lot of Karia's past... And Karia is not even his real name. His real name is actually Eugene. So yeah, the main villain of a Bleach arc, even if it was a filler arc, his name was Eugene Courier, I think, because he was originally English, where he was born. So he adopted the name Gene Karia later. So, yeah, he grew up through his long life by watching all of his kind, essentially his tribe, just eliminated and brutally slaughtered by Shinigami. Or Hollows attacking them, and the Shinigami did not care that the Hollows were killing them. Also, regular humans ostracized them as well, because they were essentially vampires. That's what the Bounts are compared to relatively early on by Uehara. In fact, the origin of the vampire myth in the Bleach universe are the Bounts, kind of. So the Bounts, as long as they draw on the souls of, well, They can drink living souls, but that's kind of a taboo amongst their tribe, and that's not something they really started doing until the Bito were a thing. Sawatari did it a little bit. That's why he's the one that like aged a lot. So they would normally drink the souls of like pluses. They would devour those souls for everlasting life. So obviously, if you have everlasting life, that's gonna draw attention to people in sort of like a Salem witch trials sort of situation. So there was a lot of discrimination against Bounts, and they were rounded up and tortured and hanged and just burnt at the cross or whatever. All these horrible things that happened to Karia, and he witnessed that firsthand throughout his long life. Sensui, on the other hand, so he deals with more of a crisis of self, brought upon by him witnessing the true nature, the evil nature of humanity. He was originally tasked with, I wrote defining humanity. It's supposed to be defending humanity. This causes him great distress and creates his 7 personalities. So I believe now it's called dissociative identity disorder, formerly multiple personality disorder. I think it's DID now. Basically, Sensui was the spirit detective that's supposed to be like, okay, you're the spirit detective, go and save all of the humans and defeat the demons. Like, that's all you got to do. And one night he discovered essentially a group of humans that were in a cult, gathering and summoning a bunch of low-level demons and brutally murdering and violating them in like this really fucked up, like satanic occult kind of ritual. So Sensui, who up until now was very idealistic, keep in mind Sensui's like the same age as Yusuke here, he's like a high school student, goes to go and just defeat not the Hollows, defeat the demons and save humanity. He's fighting through this compound, trying to stop these demons from being summoned. He opens up a door and he sees just absolute depravity. Just like the true carnal evil nature of humanity just laid out bare, like the worst of the worst of the worst laid out in front of him. He screams and just kind of has a psychotic break at that moment. We have some quotes here that I'd like to read to you. This is on Sensui. This is Koenma giving the backstory on Sensui and why he wants to do what he does. What Sensui saw there was exactly the contrary of his convictions, a scene where humans were delighted in torturing monsters. Sensui killed all the humans who were in the room. He began feeling resentment against humans, and he felt he was entrusted with an important mission. He started seeing evil in each and every human being. Sensui wants to punish all humans for their sins. And yes, that includes all humans. Not just, normal humans that aren't psychics. That includes the people that followed him. That includes everybody. And this is a direct quote that he actually says to Yusuke, I believe. "You're wrong, I don't want to destroy the world. On the contrary, I like flowers and trees, insects and animals. The only thing I hate is all human beings." So you could definitely see his mental state being a little askew there, where he sees like the worst of humanity, and he just over the years upon being obsessed with Chapter Black, which remember Chapter Black is essentially an encyclopedia of the worst travesties, oh god, I don't even know, like mass murders, world wars, global genocides, like just the worst of the worst of the worst of humanity is on Chapter Black. And so Sensui becomes obsessed with this tape, watches it constantly, and arrives at the conclusion that all humans just got to die. So that's what motivates Sensui. As for Karia, here's some quotes. These are both direct quotes from Karia. "Do you understand what Soul Society did to us? They attempted to annihilate us, to erase us from history. We will never trust them again. Our only wish now is for the annihilation of Soul Society. May they be exterminated just as cruelly as they tried to exterminate the Bount. The Bount became corrupt long ago. They were given so much power, but through it all, they refused to sever their ties with the Shinigami. And the Shinigami themselves are even more corrupt. They selfishly created the Bount in the beginning, used them, and disposed of them. I can never forgive them for the crimes they committed, so now I will take them all down with me. Shinigami, Bount, and every last soul will be destroyed." So Karia is definitely, throughout the arc, at the beginning, he's this very suave, collected kind of individual. But you can tell that that's just a visage, that's a visage, a facade of what his true is. He's wearing a mask, basically. And at the end of the day, he's very also, he's just witnessed the massacring of his tribe over and over and over again. Like nothing ever changes, nothing ever improves, to the point where he just reached the conclusion of just like scorched earth, everybody has to go. Basically, he witnessed, even the Bounts, when he tries to lead them into a new future, they refused. They refused to sever their ties, and even his own groups kind of just won't like really follow his kind of extremist viewpoints. So he deems them as useless, and so this continues to the point where Kari has just had enough. He's tried to save the Bounts on several occasions throughout history, and he's reached the point where it's like, I don't fucking care anymore. Everyone's just gonna, humans, Shinigami, Bounts, Quincy, everybody's going. Taking them all out with me. Continuing on with the parallels, getting to the final stretch here. We only have 25 slides. This is slide number 22. Achieves a rare power-up to fight the main character. The final portion of this arc also takes place in a different realm. They go to the demon realm in Yu Yu Hakusho, and they go back to the Soul Society in Bleach. So in the case with Yu Yu Hakusho, we have Sensui unlocking sacred energy, with his like the special form of energy that you can only get like after like decades and decades of training. But since Sensui has like 7 different personalities, he can kind of skip that. It's reduced down to like, I think, like 5 or 6 years of training. And then with the Bounts, with Kariya, you have the Jokai Crest, or the Jokai Show. It's basically a Ryatsu generator that was used in the creation of the Bounts, and they exist in various locations all over the Soul Society of the Seirete. And the idea is that basically Kari is going to use one to detonate the others and basically blow up everything. And then that's kind of their main goals here. That's kind of getting to the end and just like, okay, I'm just going to blow everything up. It also gives Kariya just a huge boost in power, kind of a similar to like a Bount Bankai, I guess. This is getting to the end of the arc here. The arc ends with some of the villain groups still alive but are never touched upon again. It is implied they have reformed their ways, though, and are free of the brainwashing by the main antagonist. So in the case with Sensui's minions, his followers, we have Doctor, Sniper, Game Master, and Seaman still alive at the end, and they all kind of go out to make new lives for themselves. In the case with the Doctor, he changes his face and kind of goes on to found and that's crazy for the Doctor, because he was truly like murder hobo happy during the arc with Yusuke. But by the end, I guess he's decided that, like, all right, I guess it's not too bad. And he uses his ability to actually help people with, like, cancer and stuff. And he opens a place called a hospital called the House of Miracle Hands, where he saves people from, like, severe, incurable, like, chronic illnesses. Sniper was a guy, he was just a high school student, I guess. He had a girlfriend that we see at like the very end of the arc, and they kind of just go off together and are happy. And then Amanuma and Mikari decide to just go back to school, and they end up making friends, and everything's just good with them. And then in the case with the Bount, we have Go Koga and we have Ron Tao. Now, Ron Tao was not part of the Bounts. She was actually an enemy of the Bounts. She was one of the people that created the Bounts, and she tried to, like, finish them off. She tried to fight Kariya. She actually busts out this really cool Keto shotgun at one point against Kariya, which was really dope. But anyway, at the end of the arc, Go Koga is the only Bounce still alive. Kariya dies, Yoshi's dead, Yoshino's dead, Ugaki's dead. Like, they're all dead, except for Go Koga. Yoroichi actually shows up and is, like, there talking to him, and Go Koga's like, tell Ichigo that we're sorry, kind of. And Yoroichi's like, yeah, okay, I'll tell him, and then she never does. She's like, yeah, I'll tell him, sure. And then Ron Tao's there, and I guess Ron Tao and Go Koga are just living together at the end of the arc. But once again, we never address them again after this. I'm glad Go Koga survived, though. It's like, you don't have to have every single member of the Bounce die. They're alive. One of them's alive. It's just that we never hear from them again. Finally, the main character carries some malaise and regret after defeating the villain. They ponder the reasons for the villain's action and wonder how they would do things differently. So, Yusuke, okay, it's not really so much over Sensui. It's because Yusuke got taken over by Raiden, or Ryzen. Yeah, Raiden is, I'm thinking of Record of Ragnarok. Ryzen in Yu Yu Hakusho, who is his demon ancestor, one of the great kings of the series. And that's actually going to be brought in. That's going to be the tether to the next arc, where Yusuke gets taken over by Ryzen. And that leads to him going back to Demon World, training with his father, technically speaking, and learning his abilities, and then Ryzen eventually dies, and then they do the Demon World tournament, which ends out Yu Yu Hakusho. And so that's that. So he's not really... He does think about Sensui and let him to be what he does because he was a former spirit detective, and Yusuke is. It's also something that's addressed later with Ichigo and Ginjo, when Ichigo has to straight up kill Ginjo, and he kind of reflects on, like, what would I do differently if I was you, that kind of stuff. Ichigo does ponder over Karia, just like, man, you know, he was a messed up guy that tried to murder everyone, but you can kind of see how he arrived at that. Like, imagine your family and friends and everybody you know murdered slowly throughout all of human history over the course of hundreds, if not, well, not all thousands of years, but hundreds of years, several centuries. I think Karia was born in the 1700s. So at least a good solid, like, 300 years of watching everybody you've ever loved get brutally murdered. After a while, you just kind of snap, and that's kind of what happened with Karia. So, yeah, that's it. That's all I have for you today. There's definitely more parallels, but I didn't write every single one of them down. Just to kind of give you a brief, as I say brief, this isn't over an hour-long video, but just to give you an idea of the parallels there, I thought it was an interesting thing of note that I could at least make a video about, so I did. Now, not to say that every single plot beat in Yu Yu Hakusho, in Bleach, is taken from Yu Yu Hakusho. A lot of them are, but a lot of them are also added just specifically for Bleach's flavor, like the idea of Ichigo relearning his Bankai or understanding the nature of Bankai. That's a new thing. There's also a interesting parallel that has nothing to do with the chapter Black Saga, but I need to mention it. And it's actually between Yoshino here and Uryu. So Yoshino, and they had to have gotten Kubo to address this because it's insane, really. Yoshino and Uryu have this moment relatively early on where Uryu goes back to her place and she kind of nurses him back to health after an attack by one of the Bounts, and explains the past with the Bounts and why the Bounts are after him. And Uryu feels that Yoshino's, like, personality and her appearance are very similar to her mother. To his mother, Uryu's mom. Now, we know nothing about Uryu's mom at this point in the story. We know about Ryukin a little bit, but even him, not that much. We don't find out about Uryu's mother until the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, which is actually revealed to be Kane Katagiri, one of the housemaids, one of the half-Quincy's, or mixed blood Quincy's, that work for Uryu's, I guess it would be his grandmother, Ryukin's mother. And if you go back and watch the Bount arc, there's actually a scene where Uryu has a flashback to his mom when Uryu was very little, and you see a woman there with black hair crying. And it looks like Katagiri, and Katagiri was known to cry a lot. I feel like they went to Kubo and talked about, hey, can you give us an idea for Uryu's mom? And I feel like he gave either Kubo gave them like a couple of notes about Uryu's mom, or when Kubo wrote the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, he went back to the Bount arc and was like, yeah, I'm going to use this basic design. Now, we don't see Katagiri's full appearance in the Bount arc. We see, like, one of those things where, like, we only see, like, half of her face and she's, like, silhouetted and she's crying. But it's very eerie that it's Uryu's mom being addressed, like, at this point, like, a good 300 episodes before we see her in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. It's insane. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that's added specifically for, I'll just go back to the beginning here, specifically for Bleach. Now, something else before I go. I have to commend the people that wrote the Bount arc, because you could tell they both really liked Bleach to the point that they can incorporate a lot of Bleach threads into the Bount arc. And they both really liked Yu Yu Hakusho and made that the basis, like the springboard for this arc. So, once again, if you're bored and you have nothing to do, go back and watch the Bount arc. Don't go back and watch it and be like, oh my god, this is gonna suck. Go back and try to watch it as an isolated arc. Or rather, try to watch it as an arc that continues the Bleach story. Try not to think about the stuff that comes after it with, like, the Arankars and Aizen and stuff, because obviously I mean, you can make a comparison. Kariya does show up again, actually, when Ichigo's training with his hollow, which is interesting, and he gives him some words of wisdom, and that's how Ichigo kind of helps to unlock the powers. He has visions of Byakuya, Kenpachi, and Kariya in that fight. And I think it's the last time you actually see any of the Bounts or them ever referenced. But anyway, I've jawed on long enough at this point. Thank you for watching my video essay or listening to my video essay. So there's that, and I hope you all have a good evening. This will be Teching 101 signing out. Later, everyone.